Welcome to the Climate Show with me, Tom Heap, and this week we're all about nature and we're in a little bit of wild Bedfordshire. Yeah, there is some wilderness in this county, and the reason we're focusing on nature is because of a big meeting that's happening in Canada, Montreal in fact, and the United Nations Secretary General gave this gathering a really big build-up.
Humanity has become a weapon of mass extinction. We are treating nature like a toilet, and ultimately we are committing suicide by proxy. That
summit is a gathering of governments from around the world trying to agree ways to stop the loss of nature across the planet and preferably begin to restore it as well. Some very, very ambitious targets. We'll hear about them later. But this isn't just about what happens in the Amazon or in the savannah. It matters to nature here in the UK. And later on in the programme, we'll hear from two managers here in Bedfordshire with different views on how that should happen. But we will be taking a step away from our shores to talk to someone who's had some great success in restoring nature. He's a man that's really, really passionate about frogs. And we'll also be taking a step back in time. Nature, of course, has been thriving on this planet much longer than we have as humans, and we'll be revealing a really ancient ecosystem. Well, to get the lowdown on what this United Nations meeting is all about, I'm joined by someone from Sky News' own ecosystem, science correspondent Thomas Moore, with me here in the undergrowth. Thomas, what is happening in Montreal?
So this is a meeting being held by the United Nations, pulling everybody together, trying to come up with a blueprint for reversing this decline of nature by 2030. Now, at the moment, the text runs to thousands of words and it's full of brackets, about 790 of them, containing phrases that are controversial, stuff that needs to be agreed by people within the room, and that's really hard.
I gather this headline aim is to get 30% of the land and sea, is it, into some kind of natural state by 2030?
Yes, and you know, it's a tiny proportion is currently properly protected where nature can run riot. There's controversy over that too, because there are some who say that even the protected areas aren't properly protected, that they're really just lines on a map, and that the nature still is under pressure from even fishing in areas which are supposed to be protected.
And does this involve governments making commitments to say we will protect this amount of sea or this amount of land, and having to show how they're going to do it?
Yes, so there's going to be some verification. Now, this time, previous attempts to reach an agreement have failed, but this time we've got much more technology. So you can track shipments, you can track where crops are coming from, so you will know through satellites whether there is an element of deforestation that has resulted in, for example, palm oil ending up in products back on the supermarkets here.
You make a really good point there. We've now got this eye in the sky looking down, because I've seen some of those maps of the globe that show kind of every single ship. So you can see illegal fishing, you can see different colours of the land showing up, whether they've been deforested or what's growing there. So does that give policing a better chance?
Yes, it does. And there are people who do track these industrial trawlers around the world, and they know from their transponders their exact routes. They know from the patterns that they create with these transponders whether they're fishing or whether they're just moving from one area to another. The worry, though, is that still these ships can turn these transponders off and go into dark mode, so they can't be seen. But, of course, when they flick them back on, there are clear questions to be asked. Well, why did you turn that off, Captain?
What were you hiding? Is this just about there, overseas? Is it relevant to Britain? Indeed, is there anyone from our own government going?
Biodiversity is a global issue. Of course, many people think about the Amazon and all the amazing creatures that live there, and it's true that we've probably only identified half of the plants and animals there, and that's the worry, that we could lose them without even knowing they're there. But biodiversity is a global issue. I mean, if you look at the UK, we are one of the most nature-depleted countries on the planet. And the reason is that 70% of our land area is farmland, and most of that farmland is industrially farmed. So there is not much variety in what you'll find within a crop, and that is a problem for the insects and the birds that are trying to thrive.
Just to that point, are we sending anyone from the government?
So we are sending the Environment Minister and also Tony juniper from Natural England is going, but it's not prime ministerial level.
Right.
So you're not going to see world leaders there as we did with the climate summit in Egypt just a few weeks ago.
Coming back to the UK briefly, I mean, we're in a farm now, or what was a farm, once was food, no more. But there are issues here, aren't there? So if we have more nature, which they've got here, then where is our food going to come from? Is that going to deplete nature elsewhere?
That is always the tension, and you'll speak to many farmers who say you have to grow food. It is all about food security these days, particularly with the war in Ukraine and so on. So food prices are going up because there isn't enough of it. But there are others who say, well, if you take out the 20% of the least productive farmland and you give it back to nature, that in fact your food output only goes down by 3%.
We've come into the studio now so we can hook up with other parts of the world. We will be back outside later to examine the pros and cons of rewilding here in the UK. But first, let's travel 6,000 miles to the mountains of Peru, where one man has been made a United Nations Environment Programme Champion of the Earth for his work dedicated to the conservation of endangered species and ecosystems in the Andes.
Biodiversity in many of the countries is the heritage that we must to take care of. Biodiversity in all the countries every time is becoming more and more in a big threat. Many species are starting to appear like a threatened species. One species is not just to lose one. We are going to lose other species that are part of the diet of this species, and also is going to be part of the habitat of this species. One example, if the spectacled bear will disappear, it's going to disappear also more than the 150 different species of plants that is part of the diet of the spectacled bear. We must work hard, taking action, protecting the habitats and all the areas where all this biodiversity is still surviving.
Tino from Peru, so impressive. Who doesn't want to be a champion of the earth? And our next guest is a pretty good candidate too. Ghana's first herpetologist. In case you don't know, that's someone who studies reptiles and amphibians. Caleb Ofori-Boateng is the founder of Herp Conservation Ghana, and his passion is frogs, creatures quite vulnerable to environmental damage. But his work in Ghana shows what can be achieved, discovering several new species and rediscovering ones thought to be extinct. And Caleb joins us now live from the Bobiri Rainforest Reserve in Ghana. Caleb, thanks very much. Tell me a little bit about where you are immediately around you. It looks beautiful.
Well, thank you, Tom. I'm talking to you today from the Bobiri Forest Reserve, also known as the Bobiri Butterfly Sanctuary. It's an amazing place of rainforest that has a lot of frogs and butterfly as well. It's one of our important research stations where we believe that we might have been discovering quite a number of new species soon.
Tell me about some of the new species. Give me a few names of the frogs that really excite you and you've discovered.
Well, I'm super excited about the Afia Brago puddle frog, which I discovered and described in 2018 and named after my very dear mother. It's a very fascinating frog. There's also the Konhawa Sajimasi, which is one of a kind frog species, endemic to a special forest in Ghana called the Atiwa Forest Reserve.
Now, Caleb, tell me, you've been able to actually improve the plight of frogs around you there, and have actually changed things for the better. Tell me, what have you done?
Well, Tom, I consider it a great privilege what we've been able to do, which is basically to elevate the importance of these critically endangered species in the eyes of all the stakeholders, local communities, government, to highlight them in terms of how unique and important they are, and to bring on board a lot of stakeholders, particularly local communities, to change the status of this frog. We have, for example, created new forest reserves for these critically endangered frogs, and we actually have seen a significant increase in their population. So this is really amazing, and I'm very happy and excited that I've had the opportunity to be part of this success story, Tom.
So not only halting the decline, but actually increasing the numbers of frogs there too?
Exactly, that's what we've done. And I can tell you the story of the Togo slippery frog. As you may know, it was assumed to be extinct. And when we individuals known to exist in the world, our recent estimate after protecting the habitat and stopping the consumption by the local people shows that we have about 725 individuals existing freely in the world. This is phenomenal, Tom. I'm really excited about this progress.
Yeah, and you don't own the land, so you have to do this in partnership with people, with communities. That seems to be the key for you.
Yes, we have had a lot of success with community. I'm very passionate about working with communities. And usually, you know, it's a frog, and not many people want to do anything for a frog. But we've used very innovative approaches of talking to local communities, and finally they see what we see and do value these frogs. Some of the methods we've used, Tom, is to go to churches and mosques and talk to people about the need to protect these animals, and of course what their various religions talk about it. And with this, we've had really very massive support. For example, we now protect 12,000 acres of rainforest that we did not buy. That was totally donated by the local people, including a local church. So this is really phenomenal.
Well, congratulations on the recovery of the frogs and also on your Whitley Awards. Very, very nice indeed to speak to you. So far in the show, we've focused on nature loss and recovery overseas. But this is very much a live question here too. How should we rebuild our natural world decimated by decades of intensive farming and industry? One suggestion is rewilding, simply abandoning some farms to the forces and whims of nature. It's happening in 70 countries around the world, and it's catching on here, even in the home counties. You're looking at a bit of wild Bedfordshire. More than 3 decades since it was worked as a farm. In that time, nature has begun to take over, delivering a mixed habitat of meadows and scrubby trees. And this is a typical rewilded landscape, halfway through its kind of growth to maturity. As you can see, these thorn bushes and other shrubs are pretty hostile for humans, but very friendly for wildlife. And that, after all, is the point. Until the early 90s, this was a 150-hectare working farm, growing crops to make into food. It's now the largest area of scrubland in Bedfordshire, something this man is really proud of.
As soon as I saw the site, I knew we had to save it. It's just so special. I know of nowhere else on this scale in central England that's got this wealth and abundance of wildlife. We've got huge populations of migrant birds. It's the best place I've ever been to for warblers in the spring. So as you walk, every few yards there'll be a blackcap, there'll be garden warblers, huge numbers of willow warblers and chiffchaff, 10 to 15 pairs of nightingale, up to 20 pairs of turtle doves. And we started doing more survey work since the Wildlife Trust got involved, and in the last few weeks we've found lots of harvest mouse nests as well.
This isn't a one-off. There's a growing trend for rewilding our landscape, all the way from the Highlands of Scotland to the South Downs. And it's now being favoured by government, with a policy encouraging farmers to begin rewilding 10,000 hectares of their land in just 2 years. But where does this leave food production? Food was once grown here. We need food. Does it trouble you that there's now no food coming from here?
On this particular site, I can live with that. As I say, it wasn't very productive, and most of what was grown was probably used as animal feed anyway. And over the next 2 or 3 years, I suspect we'll be reintroducing livestock to the system. That'll be good for the habitats, good for the wildlife, but will also be a form of food production. This is a really special place, And there will always be small areas that are really special wildlife habitats that are devoted to wildlife. But in the wider farmland, we need wildlife. Farmers need wildlife too. So this site's going to be a source of pollinators. It's going to be a source of beneficial insects that will improve farming next door. And it's going to be the place where wildlife overbrims this site to colonise the hedgerows that our neighbours are already putting in.
The UK imports around 40% of its food, and there are concerns that increasing that proportion could jeopardise our supplies, especially with the war in Ukraine stressing the world's food system. A few miles across Bedfordshire, Andrew Mann believes we have a duty to maintain food supplies, but that can be done while increasing the number of birds and bees.
So we're farming regeneratively. The soil's at the heart of what we do. That's first and foremost a lot of our decision making. So we're growing beans, wheat, barley and oats are our main crops. And then we've got quite a large countryside stewardship scheme, trying to encourage wildlife really.
Andrew is an arable farmer, but his methods are focused on improving soil health, and he's giving some of his worst land back to nature.
Our yields haven't dropped. We're still as productive now under our sort of regen system as we were prior to when we were ploughing, cultivating.
I think this is really fascinating. You're saying you haven't seen a yield drop here?
Yeah, we've still got the same, we're still producing the same tons of wheat per hectare that we were previously, but with a lot less cost and a lot less impact on the environment.
So when it comes to food versus nature on our land, is it either or?
No, absolutely. Farming and nature can definitely go hand in hand. I think we're proving it here. We've got some great habitat, some food for overwinter food on less productive parts of the land, and we're still producing plenty of food on the more productive areas of the farm.
Win-win.
Absolutely.
Another win-win is that managing land for nature's benefit also helps slow climate change. Andrew says his farming practices lock carbon in the soil. Meanwhile, back where the scrubland rules...
It's a site like Strawberry Hill that's doing Britain's bit for carbon storage in a cheap, cost-effective way compared with most other ways of storing carbon that will allow us to carry on farming productively in the land in between.
For centuries, our civilization and economic development have come at the expense of nature. Our future depends on growing in harmony with it. Time now to answer a couple of the questions you've been sending in, and this week it is a chewy one. Javier has asked, the Earth has a history of extreme climate cycles, so what makes now so much more important or different? And Max asks a somewhat similar question. Isn't it natural for the climate to change? Wouldn't it be unnatural to try to keep the climate constant? Well, instead of me answering these questions, I've enlisted the help of climate scientist Tamsin Edwards.
Absolutely, the climate has changed in the past, and we know that from the evidence it left behind in things like ice cores, in sediments at the bottom of the ocean. The changes we're seeing now are much bigger than we've seen for a very long time. So, for example, carbon dioxide levels are higher than for at least 2 million years. The temperatures we're seeing are getting out of the range we've been used to through our human civilization, even agriculture. So probably warmer than the last 6,500 years, and maybe even back to before the last ice age, so over 100,000 years ago. The temperatures we're predicted to head for at the moment are 2.5 to 3 degrees of warming. Again, doesn't sound like much, but the last time the planet was that warm for any length of time was over 3 million years ago, when we were pretty much beginning to craft stone tools.
Well, as Tamsin says, it's fair to say that the planet's climate has changed in the past. And now, thanks to a remarkable discovery of DNA dating back 2 million years, we understand more of what a hotter world was like and how nature could respond if global warming doesn't slow. Over in Cambridge, there's excitement in the air. Professor Esker Willerslev has just published groundbreaking research that will change the way we understand natural history.
We have retrieved for the first time DNA from an ecosystem which is 2 million years old. This is from northern Greenland, the very far north of Greenland. 2 million years ago, the temperatures were between 11 and 19 degrees warmer than today. So it's kind of similar to what we expect the Arctic will look like in the close future due to global warming. The DNA allows us to get a snapshot, if you want, of this ecosystem that is no longer there.
When Esker first suggested extracting DNA from permafrost to understand ancient ecosystems, he was laughed at. It hadn't been done before, and even he didn't know if it would be possible.
For many years, we couldn't get any DNA out of these samples whatsoever. I mean, it actually got the name, the curse of the Cap Copenhagen Formation in the group.
After years of failure, the curse was finally lifted. The team managed to get the land's ancient DNA into a sequence showing them what life was once like in what's now an Arctic desert.
If we had been there 2 million years ago, right, we would have been standing in just with our rubber boots in the ocean, right, looking up on a forest, diverse forest, and a mastodon, an elephant was running around, a reindeer was going there, a goose would be flying.
This is groundbreaking research. It will help us create blueprints for what happens to ecosystems when they heat up. There's excitement all around the world over what he and his team have achieved. There's even a documentary team following his every move.
When we got the first DNA out, right, where we could see there was huge damage patterns, and I just knew this, we hit it. I mean, this is what you live from as a scientist. This is where you get your energy from. Making a discovery that changes the way we look at the world. We found the mastodon. I was like, oh my God, no one had ever imagined a mastodon in these landscapes. It's a roller coaster ride. And in the end, it's like, yoo-hoo.
This is about more than just showing what the ancient world looked like. This is about helping us to map our future.
I believe it can help, it can make a difference, right, in the world we're living in today. And I do truly believe that going back into the past and understanding how these genetic adaptations, how organisms have handled climate change before, can give us a way where we can mitigate these impacts, right, of climatic change.
That's it for the Climate Show this week. Tune in next week for our review of the year in climate. Highs, lows, emerging trends and special guests. And don't forget, we'll bring you the latest every weekday at 3:30 here on Sky News. But for now, goodbye.